Now, this is by far one of the best documentaries that I have seen in a very, very long time. Eddie Murphy didn't just want to be famous by the age of 18. He actually believed and knew that he would be famous by the age of 18. And this is one of the many profound moments that I captivated watching Being Eddie on Netflix. Now, I'm gonna break this down from a licensed therapist perspective. So if you have not seen the documentary, there are gonna be some spoilers. So what I would suggest you do is save this video, go watch Being Eddie on Netflix, and come back so that we can talk about it. Now, those that have seen it, I wanna hear from y'all in the comments. What were your thoughts about the documentary? So I wanna start by breaking down Eddie's earlier years and like how his belief system actually propelled him to be successful. Now, in therapy, we have a modality called cognitive behavioral therapy. And what it essentially is that your core beliefs actually dictate your actions, behavior, thoughts, and feelings. Now, Eddie, at such a young age, and even from the child development stages, he was actually knowing what his purpose was. He knew what his identity was. And he knew all that before the age of 18 and actually was able to live out those dreams by the age of 18. And this was very interesting and kind of funny if you think about it, because he actually did something that most people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s try to do, is like try to figure out their purpose and what are they supposed to be doing. So for him to take bounds and leaps on that stages of development, amazing, amazing. And this is a big takeaway because what you actually believe will flourish. If you don't believe you're good enough, you're not gonna flourish. If you believe like what other people say about you that are negative, that's what's gonna flourish. Whatever you plant in your mind is what's going to grow. And it's a good thing that Eddie had that belief and that he knew he was gonna be successful to his core. And that's what, in my opinion, led to a lot of his success. Now, even going back into Eddie's childhood is interesting because he mentioned of having symptoms of OCD. And one of the things he did, and he said in the documentary, was that he would check the stove like multiple times every 5 minutes on the hour before he went to bed, just making sure it's turned off and things of that nature. And he also did like this weird like humming. I can't even repeat. It's like, it was like this thing. Y'all, if y'all seen it, y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. And he did like this weird humming thing with his voice, which was interesting because if he was to have seen a psychologist or he was to be, had done some type of therapy of some sort around OCD, and if it was noticed by other people, he probably would have been formally diagnosed with OCD. But it was interesting because he actually saw a commercial. He saw a commercial on OCD and like it had the label like mental illness, and as soon as he saw that, he was like, nah, I need to stop doing all these things because I don't have a mental illness. What's crazy is that even though he said he stopped doing it, as an adult, he still does it. And for him to not be formally diagnosed, from our understanding, or even just from what the documentary stated that he may have needed treatment because he still does it as an adult, but he catches himself not doing and checking the stove and things of that nature. Part of this is interesting because Seinfeld, he was in the documentary and he had mentioned how some folks like hyper focus on like little things. And Eddie had brought the analogy of, you know, if you bring a brand new car and it could be straight off the showroom, like I'm gonna notice like the scratch. And I wonder how much from a therapist perspective that plays into his success as a comedian, because as an artist, there are points and components where there's strengths where you have to pay attention to detail. You have to notice all the things. And sometimes with OCD, you don't notice like the good things or the good things that may be right, but you focus and hyper focus on the things that you want to change, or like these rituals you may have because it's like a safety mechanism. Obviously, we may see is like, okay, well, Eddie, he checked the stove. And it like, yeah, we want to check the stove before we go to bed. But one, as many times as he did it within that hour, like every 5 minutes getting up over the hour, like you do the math, if the math is math, and like that's way too many times to be checking in an hour. But there are other ways in which it may not be a safety thing. It may be like a hand washing ritual. Like you have to wash your hands 5 times in an hour to feel safe, or you may like tap a desk or tap a door or check the door, or you may do other things. So it's not always like one specific thing that has to do with like safety, but there's a sense of comfort that happens for folks with OCD when these rituals are actually played out. Now, Eddie had dealt with a lot of grief. And one of the things that stood out to me as a therapist and just even in his grieving process was that it was interesting because he had to take care of Red Fox's funeral and family things and matters after he passed away. Rick James, he had to take care of his funeral. Buckwheat, he actually said Buckwheat, he had to buy him a tombstone. And it's kind of interesting because all these people that he had relationships with, where was their family? You know, where was their family? Where was their finances? Like what actually happened? And I think this plays a lot into how in Hollywood, even icons deal with these unforeseen things when it comes to death, grief. And on Eddie's side, it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna step in because nobody else is there. But it kind of also shed light to how Hollywood or how these icons, how can you be so profound and so big and so famous, but somebody that isn't a family member has to take care of the funeral. And I thought it was just very interesting that whole dynamic. Like you're literally burying your icons and there's nobody else actually there to do it. But side note, I did like the play on Charlie Murphy and having the clips of him talking about his brother. Like that was fantastic. I love that so much. And if I was a betting man, I would say like those clips were from the Dave Chappelle show because it looked like the same dynamic when he's telling the story about Rick James or Prince and all those stories, that same background. So I don't know. In the chat, if y'all let me know, or in the comments, let me know, was that part of the Dave Chappelle deleted scenes? What are you guys' thoughts about that? Because I'm not too sure. Obviously, Eddie Murphy misses his brother. Charlie Murphy seemed like he was a ride or die for his brother. He was the head of security and he had no security experience. All he knew was nobody better not mess with my brother. Nobody better not mess with my brother. And I think that was a beautiful thing. And you can kind of see in Eddie's tone, his demeanor, his stature, the way he talks about his brother, he misses him. He actually verbally expressed like, hey, I miss my brother. And that was a really, really beautiful scene of Charlie Murphy being able to express his love for his brother in the documentary. Well, Eddie Murphy was one of those folks that had a clean lifestyle. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink. He tried marijuana, I think he said, for the first time when he was 30 years old. And for someone that grew up in the 80s, we're not talking about 2025, we're not talking about 2020, we're talking about the 80s. We're talking about the cocaine era, we're talking about the partying, the Studio 54s. We're talking about all the dynamics, and I don't think that we know like how complex that may have been, especially when you're in Hollywood. Like he was at the top of his game. He was a rising star. But for him to not participate in all those things took a lot of discipline. And as a therapist, I was sitting back and I was looking at the documentary like, wow, that's amazing. Eddie Murphy, you did that. You did that. And it actually shows how disciplined he was and how he had boundaries. Many times when we talk about boundaries, it's like we have rules and it's like, okay, well, this person shouldn't mess with me because of this, or I'm gonna tell this person to leave me alone. And it wasn't even that. The boundaries was really set with him from within. And I think it's an interesting part of this is that when we do set boundaries as Eddie Murphy did, like sometimes proximity to the environment is like what you have to leave. Like he would go to the parties, he would hang out, but like when that cocaine came out or Rick James was doing his thing or Prince was doing his thing, he said he left. He was out of there. He wasn't drinking, he wasn't smoking. It was time to go home. He said, I'll just sit there with my 7-Up or my Coke and just hang out. And it was cool because the other comedians that was in the documentary speaking on him, like Chris Rock, Tracy Morgan, they spoke to that. They were like, yeah, like he was a wallflower. He didn't really engage. He was really introverted. And he would leave. He wasn't engaged in all those things. And it's actually pretty dope to hear other people actually validate that. Because a lot of people will come out there and say, yeah, no, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. But no, there are people that actually were witness to his discipline and his boundaries. And it also shows because Eddie Murphy, I didn't know, he's 64 years old. And he wasn't looking nowhere near 60 or even 50 in the documentary. And I think that's a test to what he did early on in his early years. Like he didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he took care of his body, he took care of his temple, and it shows. At 64, he looks great. He looks amazing at 64. Now, Eddie Murphy had a real big influence on the comedy scene. And it's crazy because I didn't really know how much of an influence he had. I think the first time I was really exposed to Eddie Murphy was The Nutty Professor and, Dr. Dolittle. Again, I was born in 89, and from the documentary, he started his career in 1980. So by the time I was actually into comedy or watching these shows, it was like Nutty Professor was like the first time I was really exposed to him. But it was interesting because he said something that was really, really dope. And he said that he was a psychological soil for other actors that came after him that looked like him. I think that was really dope he said that, because when he said psychological soil, I was like, what does that actually mean? It's like, well, he had to plant the idea that it was okay for black actors or black men to be in certain roles without being violent, without killing, stealing, robbing, or whatever it is. Like even in the movie Boomerang, there was a lot of discrepancy because there were actually like black folks not being violent, not doing all the things that stereotypically folks think that black people do. And there was a lot of controversy around that. I was like, okay, why isn't there like any white folks in here? Why isn't there any people outside that don't look black in these movies? I thought he brought a really, really good point where he was like, well, in Boys in the Hood, nobody was complaining about white people not being in that movie or white people not being in the lead roles and things of that nature. So what are we talking about? I think that psychological soil is super important because he was a pioneer. I didn't realize how much of a pioneer he was, but he was a pioneer in Dave Chappelle's success, Tracy Morgan, Chris Rock's success, and a lot of other people that came after him, especially his influence on Saturday Night Live. So psychological soil, I think that's a term I might use, and I might play around with that term a little bit just personally myself because I like the way he actually phrased that term, the psychological soil. Eddie has said in the documentary that one of his biggest blessings was that he loved himself. And I think that attributed to how he took care of himself. Obviously, we were talking about the drinking, smoking, all those things. He had mentioned that Whitney Houston, I think, had an issue with that, like Michael Jackson and the Prince. A lot of people did not love themselves. And the self-love actually comes from knowing yourself. You can't really love something that you really don't know. So if you don't know yourself, how are you supposed to love yourself? And I think Eddie had that, even just from that early age I was speaking on earlier, was that he knew his purpose. He knew what he wanted to do. So in turn, it's easier to love yourself. A lot of times, some people may get a lot of fame or a lot of fortune and lose themselves because they didn't, at the essence, before, they didn't really know who they was, or they didn't know what their purpose was or who they were intended to be. And I think it's interesting nowadays where we have folks that go viral on social media. And when folks go viral on social media, it's like somebody posts a video, it goes viral, get like millions of views. People may think like, oh, that's my purpose and that's my calling. So I'm adapt to, whatever I was doing, I'm adapting, forming to this character to become this person that everybody enjoys watching and seeing. And I think this connects to mental health tremendously because when you don't love yourself, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. That's where a lot of depression comes in, a lot of low self-esteem, self-doubt. Those are all symptoms of some major depressive disorders, sometimes suicidal ideations, sometimes a lot of anxiety. And I think the framework around how you treat yourself, how you love yourself, how you see yourself in the world is super important. And I feel like Eddie Murphy did a great job in doing this, and I think this is why he has so much longevity in the game and being able to flourish the way he did. And did y'all know Coming to America was based on a breakup that Eddie Murphy had? I didn't know that. That was a play for me as well too. He actually developed this character after having a breakup, and I think he utilized this for like a healing purpose. And I think that's kind of dope that he did that because it's like, okay, I actually want to play out what I would like my love life to look like. And that's probably why it was such a classic movie, Coming to America, because he actually put himself in a role that he actually wanted to fulfill his own self in his own life and his own reality. But when it comes to like storytelling and that whole thing around coming to America, trying to find somebody that is gonna date Eddie Murphy for Eddie Murphy instead of Eddie Murphy for the actor, entertainer, comedian, that in itself, I think a lot of actors, comedians, musicians, I feel like they struggle with that. They struggle with that dating or trying to marry somebody that's going to marry and love them for them as opposed to loving them because they're celebrities. And I think, and maybe it's just a thought, that a lot of celebrities date celebrities because that factor isn't necessarily infrastructured always in their relationship. And it may be easier to date somebody who is already famous because you're not dating because I'm trying to get on, I'm trying to date this person because they're famous or whatever it is. There may be some levels to it, but I feel like I would argue to say I don't think that that's like the full extent of somebody's relationship as opposed to somebody who's famous dating somebody else who isn't famous. But Eddie, he was able to turn that pain into art. He was able to turn Coming to America into a masterpiece based on what he experienced in his own life. And this is evidence of fueling your passion through your pain. And I think Eddie Murphy is a prime example of doing that, especially in Coming to America. And I didn't know watching the documentary that Eddie Murphy never won an Oscar. I did not know that. I was like, he got bodies of work. Like, how can he not have an Oscar? But the man doesn't have an Oscar. He doesn't have an Oscar. And I think, I mean, we could say Hollywood and X, Y, and Z, but like, I feel like there should be points where we have to put some respect on Eddie Murphy's name. But it's dope that he has so much body of work. Like, he has so many bodies of work. The man is talented in what he does. And I think it's just interesting to say, okay, he does have an Oscar, but it seemed like he's at peace with it, which is pretty dope. Your body of work doesn't really attest to how you would get these Grammys or these Oscars and things of that nature, because a lot of people that don't have certain awards that are actually pretty dope artists. But he is a mastermind. He is like a genius when it comes down to the character development, playing multiple roles. I never, even if I'm thinking about it now, I don't think I've ever seen anybody else do what he did and play so many characters, which is dope. I mean, y'all can say Tyler Perry or whatnot, but like not. Eddie Murphy has like probably over 20, 30 characters he's played in his roles. So I gotta give it to Eddie Murphy for sure. I appreciate y'all for tapping in. If you guys watched this whole video to the whole extent, I appreciate y'all so much. From the bottom of my heart, I really, really do. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, do all the great things, keep these videos rocking and rolling. And also hit that notification bell so you know when the next video is about to drop. Until next time, you guys take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Peace.